Welcome to my Highland studio and this reveal of my Masterworks oil painting Winter Moon. An interesting title because the moon within the painting is actually the only thing that wasn't there on the day. So let me take you to the painting and explain how I came across it and how it was painted. I was incredibly lucky seeing this particular view on this snowy afternoon. It was a very cold winter's day and it was late in the afternoon. The sun was right on the horizon. It was casting its light almost parallel to the ground, catching and etching the details of the textures of the field in light and picking up those sheep at the same time. And I knew that really I had to make a painting. The moon, as I say, was not actually there. But I'd seen the moon rise over that distant headland hundreds of times. The sun too does exactly the same, and both of them look extremely large when they're so close to the ground. And I'd wanted to incorporate the moon in a painting for a long time. Almost as soon as I saw the sheep and the snowy vista, I knew that the moon would work incredibly well. And in fact, the whole composition hangs from the moon itself. The land in a landscape is usually quite dark. The sea and the sky are light. And in winter, magically, this balance is reversed. But even more dramatically so on this particular occasion, because the light was mainly in the foreground. The distant headland itself was dark too, even though it was covered in that deep snow. Even as I took my photographs, the light began to fade. The sun was sinking below the snowy horizon as night began to flood the landscape. Around me, the world was turning blue to match the distant headland. The last vestiges of that golden light had gone. I took a couple of quick photographs and returned to the studio and got straight down to my thumbnails. Here is my sketchbook from the day, and on the top left of the page you can see the thumbnails that I created. The very top left was my first idea because I thought of the panorama that I'd seen. But I then felt that with that particular balance, there would be too much sky. And there wasn't anything in the sky except the moon. Below that, again to the left, you'll see that when I squashed the format up, as it were, into a square, more of a square shape, the sheep then became a little tight. They became a little confused. There were just too many sheep in the foreground when there wasn't enough space on either side. So finally I came to the composition that I actually used in the end, where we were somewhere between the two. You'll notice there the position of the sheep, incredibly important in the foreground, almost like musical notes across a piece of white paper. And the space around them is as important as the sheep themselves. However, when I started to paint this balance proved not quite right. Just looking at the foreground in the first instance, the fence here goes almost horizontally across the picture. So we have a wide lozenge shape across which the sheep are strewn, as it were. And the spaces between the sheep are incredibly important. Are as important as the sheep themselves. And when I painted them out initially, they just didn't look right. The composition is very subtly balanced. So much so that when the sheep were first put in, they were half an inch too high. All of them were just half an inch too high. And I struggled with this for quite a while. And as soon as I dropped them that half inch, the whole composition fell into place. Now the composition begins back up at the moon. I think it's possibly the first thing that catches the eye. And this position is important too, balanced on the left, a sort of off balance if you like. The eye then moves down in a series of zigzags following edges. What I mean by that is, first of all, it travels along the distant shoreline of that promontory that goes out into the sea. It then follows the shoreline down, reaches the farm and then travels on, and then comes inland along the edges of the field until it reaches the sheep. So the eye is carried through the painting by those edges. To some degree, those edges are reinforced by the light, because when the light hits the edges of the field, the snow is at a different angle and it's picked up as a golden light. So the composition was balanced very, very carefully. And the painting built up really thinking about layers and layers of paint. First of all, the sky. The sky and the sea seem quite simple slabs of blue, but I really wanted those colours to resonate against the white beneath, and the layers on those two areas are incredibly deep. In fact, some of the layers were actually put on with a palette knife using transparent colour and a very thick gel medium to give tremendous transparency, almost like a jewel. Against those then, the opaque colours of the white can really stand out. And beneath all the snow are various layers of colour which come through that white, so that by the time the final lights are laid on, the colours glow through, and the simple whites that are placed on top, whether they be cool blue whites or gold and yellow lights, really resonate against those colours beneath. The composition inspired me so much that I decided, unusually, to paint it again. I seldom create a painting twice, but the idea of this view being seen in winter, a view which I see on a very, very regular basis, inspired me to think about what it would look like at different times of the year. And so I created a series of miniatures, 4 miniatures showing the various seasons. This one, of course, was winter. Taking the composition down to a square, the number of sheep had to be reduced so that they weren't crammed in, which was the problem I had when I was trying to do it in the first instance. You can see how I've overcome that by reducing the number of sheep, but also by changing the light that falls on that foreground segment of the composition. The light is stronger on the right and more gentle as it moves off to the left. There's also a diagonal of shadow which I introduced to the bottom right hand corner. The other paintings of the series allowed me to show a rainbow, the mists that come in. Early in the morning was painted pink by the sunlight, and finally another version which showed a spark of light on that distant headland, which is our local lighthouse. Now I'd like to share with you a reveal of the principal stages of this painting, using the traditional oil painting techniques and accompanied by some wonderful music by Lisa Mulholland.